Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to explore how literature really works, not just what stories say, but how they say it. Imagine a famous writer finishing a public speech in Tokyo. Cameras flash as he steps aside, walks to the center of a large room, and silently takes his own life in front of dozens of witnesses. It's a stunning, tragic image. Yukio Mishima, one of Japan's greatest post-war writers, ending his life with ritual precision. This scene was real, filmed for television, and it shocks even those who have never heard his name. What could drive a brilliant novelist and playwright to such an end? How did someone whose art so celebrated beauty and life come to believe that beauty and death were inseparable? In this episode, we'll take a closer look at Mishima's life and work. The man behind the headlines, the writer haunted by the ideals of ancient Japan, and the final act that still haunts readers half a century later. Yukio Mishima, 1925 to 1970, is often described as one of the most controversial and enigmatic writers of the 20th century. He wrote beautiful novels and plays, translated classical works, and yet he also founded a private army and staged a political coup attempt with the intention of restoring the emperor to power. He lived at the crossroads of art and ideology. Some readers know him only for the shock of his death. Others praise his piercing explorations of modern identity. But across generations, one question remains. Why did Mishima make the extreme journey from literature to death? And what does his story tell us about the relationship between art, ideology, identity, and performance? In today's video, we'll begin by exploring who Yukio Mishima was in his historical context. Then we'll look at the central themes of his writing. His obsession with beauty, the body, and mortality. We'll consider the tension he felt between traditional Japanese ideals and the realities of modern society. Finally, we'll examine the extraordinary ending of his life, the moment when his art, politics, and identity all collided. Along the way, we'll ask, is Mishima's final act a performance of his life's ideas? And what can it teach us about how literature reflects human dreams and obsessions? Who was Yukio Mishima? Let's take a closer look at the life of Mishima. He was born Kimitake Hiraoka in Tokyo in 1925 into a family with samurai ancestry. From a young age, he felt the weight of history. His family name and proud lineage connected him to Japan's warrior past. Yet he grew up in a rapidly modernizing country under American influence after World War II. Mishima showed talent early. He published poetry in high school and later won national awards for his stories. By 1949, at just 24 years old, Mishima became famous with his debut novel Confessions of a Mask. In it, he wrote openly about being a homosexual young man who hides his true self behind a mask of normalcy. This frank exploration of identity was radical in post-war Japan. He quickly followed it with The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, 1956, about a young monk obsessed with beauty who destroys it, and later with plays like Madame de Sade's and The Rats. His work was admired for its precise language and the striking combination of sensual beauty and ruthless violence. Mishima was also fluent in English and French, and he translated Western classics into Japanese. In the 1950s and 60s, he traveled to the West, giving lectures at Harvard and Oxford. He won Japan's most prestigious literary prizes. By many accounts, he had it all: fame, wealth, and admiration. But his later life showed a very different picture. Post-war Japan was living under new values: democracy, pacifism, and Western-style modernity. Mishima, in contrast, became obsessed with older Japanese ideals like Bushido, the samurai code, and the emperor as a spiritual symbol. He began to see modern Japan as spiritually empty. In 1968, he founded the Tatenokai, or Shield Society, a group of young men who practiced martial arts and pledged loyalty to Mishima's vision of a strong Japan. For Mishima, this was not just political activism, but a form of artistic discipline. He shaped his life like one of his dramatic novels. When he stood before that military audience in 1970, sword drawn, he declared a new loyalty to the emperor. It was as if his life had become the ultimate performance of his art and ideas. But this final act was shocking, and it left many questions. To understand it, we must look closer at Mishima's themes and beliefs, how he saw beauty, death, and the body, and how he placed himself between tradition and modern life. But from the beginning, Mishima's writing was obsessed with beauty and the body. In Confessions of a Mask, the narrator Sadao is fixated on his own body and the beautiful faces around him. The narrator describes an erotic scene involving a beautiful friend and how he felt both desire and shame. This novel shows the tension between the ideal of beauty and the reality of the body's desires. Mishima explores how physical beauty can be both a source of inspiration and of guilt. Another famous example is the Temple of the Golden Pavilion. It's based on the true story of a Buddhist monk who, overwhelmed by the perfection of a famous temple, decides to burn it down. Mishima transforms this into a meditation on violence and aesthetics. The protagonist begins innocent, but as his obsession with beauty grows, he becomes alienated from other people and finally commits an act of destruction. Beautiful settings, the temple, the gardens, contrast with the darkness building inside him. Mishima often wrote about the body as discipline. In essays like Sun and Steel, he discusses bodybuilding, martial arts, and samurai practices. He literally worked on his own body. Friends reported that he exercised intensely and kept a strict diet. In his fiction, he created characters who lived physical rituals. In the short story Patriotism, an army lieutenant performs a ritual suicide with his wife to demonstrate loyalty and purity. His body, in Mishima's eyes, was something to be perfected, like a sculpture. This focus on body and discipline reflects traditional Japanese values. The samurai were warriors who honed mind and body together. Mishima admired that ideal, but at the same time, he was deeply troubled by modern Japan, which he saw as soft and disconnected from such traditions. He often wrote about violence in a way that is cold and poetic, as if to say that passion and brutality were closer to life's essence than comfort. All this created a strange mix in Mishima's art. Love of beauty on one hand, love of violence on the other. He believed that only death and extreme acts could give full meaning to life's beauty. This is why he wrote his most violent scenes with the same careful beauty as his peaceful ones. The paradox of beauty that destroys itself is central to Mishima. He almost dared readers. Can life without struggle really be beautiful? And here's where things get interesting. Many readers see a direct line between Mishima's stories and his own life. If beauty demands sacrifice, as Mishima's art suggests, then perhaps Mishima himself believed in sacrificing everything for beauty and honor. This is a chilling idea, but it helps explain his final act. Now let's consider the tension between traditional Japanese ideals and modern society. After World War II, Japan underwent rapid westernization. The old samurai codes were officially broken, and the emperor became a symbolic figure under a new constitution. Mishima, who grew up reading the samurai classics of pre-war Japan, felt this change as a personal crisis. He often wrote about the contrast between old and new. In his novel, The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, a young boy from a traditional family idolizes a naval officer who seems to embody honor. But when that officer seeks a normal domestic life, the boy and his friends are horrified, thinking he has betrayed the purity of his life. The ocean ship becomes a symbol of a grand purpose, whereas marriage feels like decay. This story shows Mishima's distrust of bourgeois comfort. He believed ordinary modern life was spiritually corrupting. Mishima also wrote essays and plays criticizing the loss of traditional values. He admired the emperor as a cultural symbol, not a political dictator. He liked the image of Japan as an island fighting to preserve its identity. He formed the Shield Society of young men who studied martial arts and were ready to die to protect the emperor, seeing themselves as the last true samurai. This was extreme even in the 1960s. At the same time, Mishima was very much a creature of modernity. He loved Western classical music, read Nietzsche, and even Hollywood films. He lived in Tokyo's upscale Ginza district and wore suits. This contradiction, a modern man longing for the past, runs through his work. The tension gives his writing a nervous energy. The world he describes is always on the edge, a decaying piece about to shatter, a beautiful moment on the brink of violence. In short, Mishima's worldview could be summed up as modern Japan is empty, and only a return to ancient ideals can restore meaning and beauty. That ideological stance is woven into his fiction. Scenes of riot, self-sacrifice, and ritual suicide are treated almost like artistic performances. Now, if we step back for a moment, consider what this implies. Mishima's literature asks hard questions about identity. What does it mean to belong to a culture? What do we owe to our ancestors? And how do we find beauty in a changed world? For Mishima, the only answers were radical ones, and as we'll see, he put those answers to the ultimate test. We've seen Mishima's life and writing build up a dramatic tension: love of beauty, fear of modern decay, desire for honor. How did all this end? On November 25, 1970, Mishima and 4 members of the Shield Society seized control of a military officer training camp outside Tokyo. Mishima then gave a speech from the balcony to the assembled soldiers, criticizing the Japanese government for abandoning the emperor and national tradition. Eyewitnesses say his speech was passionate, but largely ignored by the soldiers below. When he finished, Mishima stepped back, drew a samurai short sword, a traditional dagger called a wakizashi, and stabbed himself in the abdomen. This ritual suicide, called seppuku, was the final act in a centuries-old samurai tradition. His second-in-command attempted to behead him to complete the ritual, as was custom. This was a shocking and carefully prepared event. Mishima had written about such suicides in his novels, yet actually performing one was unprecedented for a modern writer. It was at once a political statement and a personal performance. He had literally taken the devotion of his writing and performed it with his life. Some might ask, was this insane? Or was it, in a twisted way, consistent with Mishima's beliefs about beauty and death? Mishima seemed to believe that the human body, in its final act of discipline, could achieve ultimate beauty. He once said that dying by one's own hand, at one's chosen moment, was the purest form of art. Whether we agree or not, it's clear he treated his life as a work of art to its very end. This final act sent shockwaves through Japan and the world. Many writers and intellectuals in Japan condemned it as dangerous fanaticism. Others were captivated by the tragic, beautiful cruelty of it. Nobel laureate Kenzaburo Oe, for example, criticized Mishima's ideology, but admitted the complexity of his art. Today, the image of Mishima's death, polished and deliberate, still haunts art and film. In his film, Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, director Paul Schrader shows Mishima writing his novel side by side with reenactments of Mishima's final speech and suicide, emphasizing how they blur together. Now, if we step back, what broader lessons does Mishima's life and work offer? First, it reminds us that art and life can be dangerously entwined. Mishima's art was never just about fiction. It was about embodying ideas. He strove to make his life a living example of his stories. This raises questions. Can a writer truly separate personal identity from artistic identity? Mishima seemed to answer, no, they should be one. Second, Mishima's example shows how ideology can become a form of aesthetic obsession. For Mishima, nationalism and ancient ritual were not just political positions. They were part of his sense of beauty. He believed power and honor had an aesthetic dimension. By dramatizing his suicide, he turned politics into theater. This is a disturbing idea, that political acts might be driven by the same desires that drive artists to create beauty. Third, his story forces us to ask, should we judge art by the artist? Mishima's politics make readers uncomfortable. Some refuse to read his works because of his extremism. Others argue that his fiction stands apart from his actions. This is the classic question of art and morality. Mishima's life dramatizes it. If an artist becomes part of his art, how do we separate truth from performance? Finally, Mishima's life challenges the modern ideals of democracy and individualism. He questioned the empty pursuit of happiness in a society that had outlawed ritual and sacrifice. In doing so, he pushed readers to consider what Yukio Mishima remains a fascinating and disturbing figure. He gave the world masterpieces of literature, novels that still move and unsettle readers. And then he ended his own life in a blaze of ritual. Why does this story grip us so strongly? Perhaps because it taps into something deep in all of us. The desire to live fully and the fear of living falsely. Mishima believed that beauty must be forged in the fire of life and death. He pursued that belief to its extreme. We may not agree with his conclusions, but his life asks us to think, what do we worship, and what are we willing to sacrifice for it? I'm curious what you think about this. Do you think Mishima's life was a form of artistic performance? And can a writer's life change the way we read their works? If you enjoy exploring how literature works, consider subscribing. And until next time, read slowly, and notice more.